Hello everybody and welcome back to another Marvel Crisis Protocol Character Spotlight. And for this week's episode of the series, we're going to be taking a look at Quicksilver, the fastest speedster currently in the game. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and dive right into things here, starting out with his basic defensive line here. And he's coming in very standard here. He's got a 3-3-3 across the board, 5 stamina, and is a 3 threat. He's going to be a long mover, which is the most noteworthy thing here, and is a size 2, but otherwise this is about as basic as it gets for a 3 threat stat line. Moving into the attacks is where we start to get into more interesting things for Mr. Pietro here. He's got his supersonic strike attack. This is a range 3 4-dice physical attack. It's going to gain in power based on the damage dealt. However, it has a couple really interesting triggers. The first being a crit shield dash. After the attack is resolved, he can advance small, and a wild hit velocity. After the attack is resolved, this character may make a supersonic strike attack. This attack may not target the original target character. So what's interesting about this is, unlike most things that generate another attack, this doesn't have the clause that it can only happen once. You can then generate another velocity attack off of your velocity attack. So in theory, if you roll that wild and hit enough times, and you have enough targets in range, although the crit shield dash can help with that, you could punch an infinite number of times with Quicksilver, of course, assuming you have legal targets to punch. But yeah, you can just kind of like pick two models and ping pong between them until you take them both out or one of them out or something like that off of a single action. Now, the odds of doing that, very low. It's a wild hit on 4 dice, so not the best, but is kind of cool and something that makes them a little bit more unique, and definitely something you can kind of think about building around when kind of deciding if you want to run Quicksilver in a list. So yeah, definitely one of his kind of cooler things there is his potential to go infinite there, something not really many, if any, other characters in the game can actually do, so definitely a cool thing for him. His spender, while not quite as interesting, is still pretty solid. It's a 2-cost range 3 6-dice physical attack, Cyclonic Vortex, and after this attack is resolved, he's going to automatically advance medium. So this is great if you just want to get that extra movement, you want to have a little bit better consistency on your damage with a 6-dicer. Yeah, this is a solid spender. It's nothing crazy, but it only costs you 2 power, so not really any harm in using it. Unless you're getting really good dice on your velocity triggers, though, we're not really hitting all that hard with this character. He's much more of a kind of skirmishy piece, diving in and out of the battle, and trying to just kind of spread some damage around and move around between points and things like that. This is kind of the role he's going for here. Next, we go into his abilities, where he's got Speedster. This is a 2-cost active. If this character is not holding an objective token, it advances long. The super can only be used once per turn, and yeah, this is just good, especially in some of his affiliations, or really any affiliation where you can get that going turn 1, being able to just send him up the board. He has the range 3 attack from there, so you can choose to either try to double tap with him, or maybe punch, see if you get the dash to get onto an objective, and then if not, just move on to it yourself. So yeah, you kind of have some cool options with that. And then just later in the game, if you need to get somewhere quick, you need to go flip a point on like a pay to flip or something like that, you need to go pick up an objective on the other side of the map, that sort of deal. Really useful. Just of course you got to keep in mind that it doesn't work if you're already holding one, so he is a little bit slower once he's picked something up. Next, we start to get into his defensive tech here with Can't Catch Me. This is a 3-cost reactive. When this character is targeted by an attack, you may use this superpower. This character advances small. If at the end of the advance, this character is outside of the attack's range or the attacker's line of sight, the attack ends. If it is the attacker's activation and the attack did not target multiple characters, the attacker may make another action. The superpower can be used only once per turn. So basically, he has a escort to safety or a Gwen's lifesaver on himself, and yeah, this is good. This is really good. Being able to do this, even just threatening this, is a huge way to screw with your opponent's turn and their action economy for that turn. So yeah, this is really nice to have and a huge part of his defensive kit here. And even just kind of being able to say like, hey, you try to punch me, I'm just going to step over onto this objective here or something like that. Can just be another deterrent to say, maybe I'm not even trying to get out of range. I'm just going to steal your point in the process of you trying to attack me, if you're confident you can survive it. And while at first his defenses don't look all that great, you do have some confidence you can survive things, because his next superpower here is Supersonic Reflexes. When this character is defending against a physical or energy attack, or making a dodge roll, always nice when it includes those, it may reroll up to 2 of its defense or dodge dice. And yeah, I mean, that's solid. It's basically Spider Sense. Actually, I think it's pretty much exactly Spider Sense. and Spider Sense is, for most people, a pretty solid defensive ability. I mean, doesn't tend to do much for me lately, but that's just me being salty with MCP dice. And yeah, this is good. This makes your 3 dice effectively feel like 4 or 5 dice most of the time. I'm hesitant to say 5, obviously, because your spike potential becomes way higher there. But yeah, on average, you should be blocking at least 2 on physical or energy most of the time with these, and that's pretty good. That makes that 5 health not feel quite too bad. I still wouldn't go as far as to say he's bulky, but that definitely helps a lot. And lastly here, he has Wallcrawler, which is also really, really nice with Can't Catch Me. You can use Can't Catch Me and Wallcrawler together to get yourself behind line of sight blocking terrain, which is also just really, really nice to have. On top of that, though, it just helps his mobility more, with all those long advances that he's taking. Being able to not care about terrain is very, very nice. So that's definitely something he is very glad to have on his kit. Taking a look at the flip side real quick before we move on, and there is nothing different here. He is the exact same. So once he flips over, he's still 5 stamina, same defenses, same attack stats, and all that fun stuff. So nothing changing there, but yeah, it's a pretty solid kit overall. I mean, obviously he kind of has his main thing. He's going to be really, really good at getting around the map. Going to be fantastic for, pay to flip style objectives where you want to be rotating between the points constantly. He's quite good for, your D shapes and things like that are more spread out. He's going to be able to go to those and potentially make some attacks while he's at it. So yeah, he's definitely a very kind of versatile piece for those types of scenarios. In terms of a straight up brawl, he's probably not going to last too long, and he doesn't hit that hard. You most likely want to kind of avoid him on the E-maps and things like that unless you have a specific plan. That said, on those E-maps, if you get the velocity chain going, he could potentially do a lot of work there, but you either need to be really lucky or have a really, really solid plan to get that more consistently. And we are going to talk about some things you can do if you really want to play with that trigger, because in my opinion, that's the most fun part of his kit. But realistically, you're probably better off playing him as kind of an objective skirmisher style piece. Taking a look at tactics cards, he does have 2 cards here. The first one is Can I Borrow That? And in my opinion, this is a really, really solid card for him, although it is pretty specific on when you can bring it. So it's an unaffiliated reactive card. After an attack made by an allied Quicksilver that damaged an enemy character holding an asset token is resolved, he can spend 2 to play this card. Okay, so there's already some things to unpack there, specifically an asset token, which means it doesn't apply to objectives that are referred to as civilians. So this is going to apply for like hammers or Montesi. It'll work great for that, whereas something like your Skrulls, not so good. So yeah, you got to be mindful of the scenario you're playing when you choose to bring this card, because there are some scenarios where you can't bring it. And then on top of that, you have to damage the enemy character in order to play this card, which is not the worst thing in the world, but considering he's mostly throwing 4-dicers, it's not always the most consistent. That said, the actual effect it has is really, really good. Move 1 asset token from the target character to Quicksilver. He picks up and is now holding that token. This card does not allow him to hold more than the crises specifies. And yeah, it turns out objective steals are good. I mean, there's not much more to say about it than that. If you're running Quicksilver and you don't already have an objective steal in your list, this card is definitely worth considering, especially if your extracts, you're including some assets for yourself. Yeah, it's a solid card. It's just very situational when you can use it, and you definitely want to try and weigh that, being able to deal damage part as much in your favor as possible when, it's a time you want to play that card and you need to make it count. So definitely some downsides to it. It's not the strongest version of this type of effect in the game by any means, but this type of effect in general is very, very strong, and this is a very good card. His other card here is Difficult to Please. This is actually a Brotherhood of Mutants card, and it's also going to be an active card. If an allied Scarlet Witch has dazed or KO'd an enemy character this round, and an allied Quicksilver has interacted with or picked up an objective token this round, Magneto may play this card. You may remove an activated token from Magneto. So this relies on you bringing 3 characters, Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and Magneto. Now, the actual conditions for this card are pretty easy to do. Scarlet Witch is very good at dazing or KOing enemy characters, and Quicksilver should be interacting with or picking up objectives basically every round. So yeah, I mean, if you're bringing all 3 characters, this card's actually probably quite solid. Unfortunately, you don't really see those 3 characters brought together all that often, largely just because Scarlet Witch being a 5 and Magneto being a 6 makes it a little bit awkward to bring them together, especially when you have access to stuff like Juggernaut in Brotherhood. But if you want to bring the thematic trio, this card is probably a really, really solid card. I mean, giving Magneto another activation for things Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were probably trying to do anyways is pretty good. So yeah, I mean, it's a good card, just on kind of an unfortunate trio of models. With cards out of the way, we're going to take a look at the affiliations he's a member of. He's a member of three affiliations here, those being Avengers, Brotherhood of Mutants, and Inhumans. We'll start things out with the Avengers, where instantly I do really like him with actually all three of their main leaders. I think he gets a fair bit of value from all of them. We'll just go in order here, starting with Sam. And yeah, under Sam's leadership, he definitely kind of fits the bill for what Sam wants to do. He wants to go wider, he wants to bring more models if he can. Being a 3-threat, that works great. He wants 3 threats that can take a punch. He's got that bit of defensive tech there. He's not the bulkiest model in the world, but he's not likely to go down in one hit. So that works out nicely as well. The healing on him is going to be great. Special condition removal is going to be really, really nice if he gets like slowed or something like that. And I mean, he doesn't need the advance too much, but it can't hurt. So yeah, he definitely appreciates the leadership here. And yeah, I think he works pretty well for a Sam Spam style roster. Next up, we have Steve 1, who gives him access to his long move right out the gate, which is nice if you want him to be able to start punching things very, very early, or even just kind of to throw him over to like your opponent's back point or something like that if you're not playing on, a pay to flip and there's actually value to doing that. It can be useful for that. You can get him onto a back point and punching something, which is pretty cool. So yeah, he definitely appreciates this. It also works for his defensive can't catch me as well, which is really, really nice, making that a little bit cheaper, because that is definitely one thing that he kind of struggles to consistently afford is can't catch me. So bringing that down to 2 cost and bringing his run down to 1 cost definitely helps out with that. So yeah, turns out Steve 1 is good. Steve 3 is also really fun with him. I'm probably the worst of the 3 in terms of actual competitive for Quicksilver, but I mean, the leadership is just kind of insanely good, and being able to use it to guarantee velocity or dash triggers on his basic attacks there is really, really solid. So I mean, even though I think if your main game plan is fishing for those triggers, you're not necessarily doing what he's meant to be doing, it's a lot of fun, and I think Steve 3 is probably one of the best places to do that. So yeah, definitely a fun place to run him, although I would argue that these two are probably better for Quicksilver himself. Moving on to Brotherhood as one of his other affiliations here. He's got access to 2 leaders here, those being Magneto and Mystique. Under Magneto's leadership, of course, he has access to that card, which is interesting if you're choosing to bring Scarlet Witch along as well. The leadership itself is not the best for him, or rather, he can benefit from the leadership, but he can't really do much to help your other models with it. So if you've already got a team where you're like really happy with all the models, but none of like they're all blowing up terrain and stuff like that already, but you've got 3 threat left and you don't really need more sources of that, then Quicksilver can be a good slot in there if you want a solid objective piece that can just kind of skirmish around for it. Kind of competing with Toad there, but it can't really hurt to have both. So yeah, I mean, he definitely appreciates the extra power from it, but he won't be feeding into it, so you got to keep that in mind if you're trying to build a Magneto list. Including Quicksilver, you kind of want most of the rest of your team to be destroying terrain every turn, so you don't really feel the one turn where you're not, is kind of the idea there. And then, of course, you also have Mystique, who's a little bit more of an objective-focused leadership, and I think can be really interesting with Quicksilver, because he definitely has the ability to kind of interact with some points, run away from them, do his thing, and then if he needs to come back and place the token back down, that kind of works out for him. He definitely appreciates the extra little bit of power there, too, so that is a thing, too. And, yeah, in general, I think he plays into Mystique's kind of game plan reasonably well, but there's not really much more to it than that. As previously mentioned, for the affiliation as a whole, I think his biggest issue here is that he's competing a little bit with Toad, but having both of them isn't necessarily a bad idea, especially if you're on something that has multiple objectives kind of on the midline worth going for early, because with stuff like Magneto, you can very easily get him up to like late safe grab sort of levels, which isn't always the most ideal thing, but then he's also kind of in a situation where he can punish if they don't grab safely, so you kind of get some cool versatility / threatening potential with him there. Final affiliation for him, and my personal favorite to run him in, although I don't know if it's necessarily the best, is going to be Inhumans, where of course we have a lot of exciting things coming for the Inhumans in the near future. So we'll start things out with the original Black Bolt leadership here, which allows you to basically spread power between your characters, and Quicksilver loves this, because he loves a little bit of extra power here and there, but sometimes he doesn't need it, and he doesn't mind kind of sharing it around. So yeah, he definitely is a fan of this. I mean, most models are a fan of this in some way, shape, or form, and he's no exception. Yeah, this is a good leadership for him. Next, we have Maximus the Mad here. Maximus is kind of interesting for him because as much as he doesn't love it if he gets placed off of that skull, because he's rerolling a die, he has better odds of getting stuff like his velocity trigger, which lets him short advance, and that's going to let him undo the place and then some. So he can mitigate the downside of the leadership reasonably well, and he definitely appreciates the free rerolls. So yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting one for him. I'm curious to see how this one's going to kind of play out once Maximus actually releases. And our last leadership here is Medusa's, and I don't think he's great for Medusa's. We can't actually see it here because it's on a card, but I don't think he's great for Medusa's. It's all about taking down opposing models, and Quicksilver isn't necessarily the best at that. He can be okay for finishing off models on low health, but he's not really the one you're expecting to take them down from full most of the time, so he's not going to get as much out of this one, but I mean, he's still just a solid piece to have in the affiliation. As far as other affiliations go for Mr. Quicksilver, I think there's a couple ways you can kind of go about it. First of all, I think he does appreciate power leadership, so if you want to play a power leadership, he's probably going to have a good time. We already kind of talked about Steve 1 and how that works out for him, but you know, I could see anything from like A-Force to even like Red Skull 2 Hydra or something like that, if you really wanted. Any of the power leaderships will probably work okay for him. Emma, same deal, and he's got, you know, just enough bulk that he's kind of okay in Emma for the healing as well. So yeah, there's a few different places you could kind of go with that. Personally, if I was playing him and I just wanted to kind of maximize how much fun I could have with his triggers and things like that, I'd be looking more towards rerolls, and specifically rerolls that I can use more than once in a turn, because I think that makes him a little bit more interesting and just kind of better. So few kind of options for that, but the first one that springs to mind for me is actually Shadowland Daredevil, where you give him access to one reroll on all of his attack dice, including skulls, and that suddenly becomes really, really nice, just kind of being able to try and push through more velocity triggers, and that could be really, really fun, especially if you can stack that up with like a Zemo or a Strucker or something like that. Could be really, really fun to just be like, hey, here are my 4-dicers rerolling 2, and if I get a wild hit, I'm punching you again, and that doesn't stop. I think it could be really fun just to try and maximize that out. You could also just do it with a bunch of like reroll auras and be able to kind of have it more like finite controlled set amount of time sort of deal, but I think it's more fun if you can set it up to be passive, and yeah, again, I don't think that's necessarily the most competitive way to go about it, but it seems like it would be a lot of fun. The other route you could go is, because he's a wild hit trigger for that, you could use one of the leaderships that's like if you got a wild, then you create a hit out of it. I want to say that's actually also Criminal Syndicate. MODOK is like that. Yeah, he totally is. Hit or a shield, which is also really nice because one of his triggers was shield as well. And then M'Baku, I don't know if M'Baku is just a hit or shield as well, but very, very similar idea. One or more wild, yeah, just to a hit, but still, that's pretty solid. This one is only once per turn, so you can't go infinite with that one, but it's still pretty nice. The other way you can kind of approach with him is kind of pushing towards that more defensive side. I think he makes a pretty decent web warrior if you want to run him with them. They do already have a amazing roster of 3 threats, so of course he's competing a lot there, but if for whatever reason you feel like you need another really fast model or another steal, then he's certainly a viable option. He can keep up with them just fine. He's got pretty much the exact same defensive tech they do, and he definitely appreciates something like Miles' leadership as well. But that is just about going to do it for Quicksilver here. So yeah, overall, I think Quicksilver's pretty solid and is a little slept on. I'm not going to say too much because you do see him occasionally, but yeah, he's really, really solid. He does his thing exceptionally well. He's a very fast model that's kind of easy to slot into most types of lists. He's mostly self-sufficient. If you can give him a little bit of extra power here or there, he definitely appreciates it. Same for rerolls and things like that. But for the most part, he can kind of stick to himself, stay alive using Can't Catch Me and supersonic reflexes when he does get hit, and just kind of skirmish around, deal some damage, put out some plink, usually staying at a pretty safe distance, especially if you can get some cyclonic vortexes out of there. Maybe you get a cool turn where you get to like double or triple velocity or something like that. Could be pretty cool, but probably not something you're going for too often, although as a Hail Mary it could be a lot of fun. And he does have a steal on a card, which is really, really nice if you want to try and bring that along in some of your different affiliations of just kind of like, hey, I want a piece that is really good on pay to flips and has a steal, because that's kind of where he's going to shine the most, I think. But yeah, that's going to do it for our discussion on Quicksilver here. Let me know what you guys think down below. Are there any combos or synergies that I didn't mention here that you guys like to use Quicksilver with? Definitely curious to hear what you guys think, other affiliations, things like that as well. But that's going to do it for my thoughts, so hope you guys have enjoyed. If you did, please do drop a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, helps us out a bunch, lets us know you guys are enjoying the stuff we are throwing out here. But that's going to do it for this one, so until next time, have a great day, everybody. Peace.